Good afternoon. My name is Kaye Basford. I'm going to be chairing this session of the Research for Development Impact Pathway Through Disruption. This is session 28 on sustainable farming systems in Southeast Asia. We have 3 speakers this afternoon: Daniel Tan, Zannie Langford, and Imon George. Unfortunately, Zannie can't join us, but we will be having her presentation and you will see and hear what she has to say.
Yes, you have until
we are going
so we'll have to finish at 5:03, but yes, you actually got
go forward. I don't know about anybody else, but I can hear someone speaking in the background.
Yeah.
They've just gone away, so maybe it's fine now. So given that we have not a lot of time, I'd like to go on to Daniel. Daniel is from the University of Sydney. He's going to speak about scaling of innovation to improve farming systems and livelihoods in lowland Cambodia. Over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Kaye. Yes, so I'm from the University of Sydney, and I hope you can all see my slides. Yes. Okay, good. Yes, so this is a team of researchers. I lead a team including the Myanmar University and also the Kyaw in Cambodia. And we are working in an area. Okay, so that it's quite a big team, as you can see. We are funded by the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, and we partner with Kyaw, which is funded by DFAT. And we have several universities, Myanmar University, University of Battambang, and several NGOs as well. So it's quite a big team. So we are working in an area where not many ACR projects are working. Most of them are in the south part of Cambodia. We are in the northwest part of Cambodia, and it is northwest close to the Thongli Sap Lake. It's a big lake here that's linked to the Mekong River. And it's sort of linked to the flooded forest here, and then an area called the active floodplain, where it floods every year and then it recedes. And also the rice areas up here, the old alluvial terraces, right, in the northwest, and Siem Reap is up here. So it's sort of a northwest area where very few projects are working on at the moment. So just have a quick background on the systems here in Cambodia. So basically in the rainfall, we have the early wet season, which is here early in the year. And then we have a mini, like they call a baby dry season. And then we have the main wet season up here, and then a dry season right at the end. So it's very similar to the sort of seasons you see in Thailand or Cambodia or Myanmar. So in the systems here, especially in the old alluvial terraces that we mentioned about, most farmers have no irrigation. So what happens is that they grow only one rice crop in the land, and they don't use the land for anything else. So it's quite a bit of a waste, actually, a lot of land that's being fallow most of the year. And then we have some with a little bit of irrigation, and we can grow 2 rice crops. And these are the short duration rice crops, and they have an opportunity to diversify here. And we also have farmers that have, let's say, sometimes we have dry season irrigation, which is not many, but so they have an opportunity maybe to have 3 rice crops, but very few of them do that, of course. And also some diversification options as well. And other farmers I mentioned before, next to the Thongli Sap, where they have the active floodplain, where you can have a rice crop and then it floods, so you can't have much of a crop unless you have like those floating rice where you can just, float on in the flood. And then after the rice crop, you can probably grow some mung bean or other vegetables in the receding water. When the water from the Tonle Sap goes back, you have water that they can use to grow the crops. So these are the options for the different ecological zones in Cambodia, Northwest Cambodia. So a bit of background. Interestingly, this is one part of Cambodia where people actually don't do much transplanting, like in Vietnam or in Laos, people do transplanting. But in Cambodia, the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of farmers actually just broadcast the seeds, which is quite interesting because it's not that, it's not that common, I suppose, in a lot of areas for doing that, but they do that. They just broadcast, but very high rates of density, like putting in over 180 kilograms per hectare. That's a huge amount of seed that they're broadcasting. And the reason is because of the low, that doesn't rain straight after. So what happens is that a lot of the seeds die, or they get eaten by crabs or something, or birds. So, so it's not very efficient. So what we have done in our project, we tried different technologies in field experiments, mechanized drum seeder from Vietnam, Eli seeder, which is an indigenous Cambodian technology that is being scaled right now. But we started this working with the company with Brooklyn Bridge to Cambodia, which is an NGO. And then there's Thai kit seeder, which is for mainly dry seeding. Okay, so we tried different ones. As you all know, the reason why we're using all these different seeding technologies is because this traditional hand broadcasting is not very efficient. Either you get, too high a density, or patchy density, which is not really what you want. Okay, so what have we done? In addition to trying to intensify rice production with direct seeding and good practices, we also help farmers ask the farmers, what else do you want to do? How can we help you to diversify into like mung beans or other vegetables and other diversification crops in between the rice crops? So we're trying with farmers, we are working with them to help to develop direct seeding of mung bean as well, but we found that there's a lot of trips there, some challenges. And with fish as well, they have rice farms and also fish farms, and they use the water to water the rice. So it's a bit of a closed loop system, sort of. And we're helping them to intensify a bit of that fish growing as well, just to help them to, basically working with them to see what issues they have and how we can help them intensify and diversify. So a bit of learning. Sometimes what we do is in our project, we have two stages. One is we did science and also social science, and ask questions on how can we help them? How can we help these farmers? And then the next stage is a scaling stage. So I'll talk about the first part where we develop the science first. And the first part, we published a few papers on this, and we were looking at social network analysis, and we're trying to find out where do farmers get their information from. So we asked them, go around asking each farmer, who do you ask information from, like for farming advice, crop production advice, and they said they get it from this person or that person. And a lot of them, when we do the network analysis, we found that there are central actors or players in there, and where people find information from. This particular one is like a vice president of the farming association. So a lot of people get information from this person, one particular person. And we also ask, sometimes we ask questions in different villages is different. Some people, sometimes this central person might be an input seller, like someone who sells pesticides and fertilizers. And that's where all the farmers get the information from. So what we're trying to do in this project is not like trying to push our information to farmers. We're trying to find out how they get their information and what are the processes in each village and in the system, so that we can work with them and find out where they get the information from, and then we help them to get information through the central actors. That's the key to what we're trying to do. So these central actors it's quite interesting, because sometimes you think of the central actors being individual, somebody there, or it could be a collective. Sometimes it's a farmer group. It could be an agricultural cooperative that people interact with. So it's a group of people, not just a single person. Okay, so Peter Matos is one of our social scientists, and he helped us to develop this system. So we need to look at attributes, for collectiveness. How do the actors work? Do they distribute, like, for example, agricultural cooperatives? Some of them might be distributing rice and giving access to markets. So we need to look at the markets, the networks. And individuals, are they like really prominent people in that people work with, and that links into like what the ego networks, which is sort of like a, how charismatic they are. So it's quite complex actually, but it's quite common sense as well. So here it gets a bit complicated because we're looking at different issues. So you need to think about, for private sector or public, community. This is like a bit of like the theory of change. How do people think in terms of, what sort of questions you should ask, whether it is, if it's, whether it's what kind of technologies, what kind of, whether they are popular or not. If they're individuals, they might be a popular person. And if it's the, a private sector area, it might be a different issue as well. And how does the technology diffuse, right? You got to think about all these questions. And sometimes some individuals, if they're picking individuals, they may not want to they might have their own agenda. They may not want to, propagate information that that's like technologies that you want. Like for example, if you want to help farmers to get them interested in direct seeding, they may not be interested in it because this person that you chose as a lead farmer might not be interested in that. Maybe he or she might be selling something else that is conflicting with what technology that you're trying to propagate. So that's the thing. So that's a bit tricky, not very simple. Okay, this is an interesting example. So if you look at if you ask farmers, do you spray insecticides and that, they say, no, we are organic, we don't spray. But if you go around looking in their fields, they chuck away their, after they spray, they put it on, throw it on the side of the field or something. You can see, what pesticides they use. And one of the interesting things, if you look at the pesticides, you can see they tell you this particular insecticide, what does it kill? And that's fine, the trips and stuff. But you see that sometimes they add in a photo of a beneficial, like a ladybird. Okay, and then you can see this one, another ladybird here. So this is a beneficial one. So I asked them, why do you put in a beneficial? Why are you trying to kill your ladybirds? Not because you want to sell more insecticides, because they kill the beneficials. I said, no. Ladybirds, maybe we don't understand which is ladybirds, what kind of ladybirds they are. Some ladybirds are very good. They might eat the other pests, but some ladybirds, like the 28 spotted ladybirds, might eat some of our tomatoes. They're focused on maybe more solanaceae type crops. in Cambodia anyway. So that's an interesting one. These are companies that are putting in beneficials, and that they are mistakenly. I mean, I don't mind them putting in 28 spotted daily beetle because that's pest, but they're putting in actual species that are beneficial. So that there's a lot of misunderstanding, even with the pesticide input sellers. So what have we done? We've developed a free app, both in Khmer, which is Cambodian language, and also in English, so that you can swap it and work out what weeds you have, so they can identify the weeds in the field, and also how you can manage it, right? So that's one of the things we're doing. Another one is in mung beans, there are lots of pests as well. And we are trying to educate both the input sellers and the farmers on what the pests are. And we have both English and Khmer as well. And then the farmers tell us, oh, we were born during the Khmer Rouge period. We don't know how to read. So we did a voiceover as well. So they can help them to read it out on the app. So the next step is, how do we scale this? Okay, we've done all the science. How do we get it out to the farmers? So one of the key things, these are the 4 strategies. One is to train the government officials so that they can train the input sellers, right? So it's inbuilt into the courses that they have, certification courses. Next, we also engage with farmer hubs, all the innovation platforms and farmer groups that we are working with. Basically, these are the groups that, and also individuals that help to expand or scale out all these technologies. And also we work with private sector, especially with planting machinery, service providers. I'll spend a bit more about it later. And also we educate farmers and input sellers and the community using radio broadcasts and podcasts, especially during the pandemic period. So this is just last year where we had training sessions where we trained the government officials. As you can see, all masks on because it's COVID, and we try to space them out as well. And we train them. And we train them so that they can include the technology that we developed, the information, into the input seller certification course, so that we don't have to train them all the time. The government has that in their curriculum. And when they're certifying these input sellers, which happens every 3 years, I think, they will train the input sellers for us. So it will continue beyond the project. Next, we worked with NGO called Syngenta Foundation, and they help to link the farmers with the market, giving them market access, contract farming, and helping them they basically give them a franchise type system so that they have a system for agricultural cooperatives to help their group better. So we have different hubs. I give you an example. This is one hub here on seed production, and another hub here looking at land preparation and direct seeding.
Just a couple of more minutes, Daniel.
Sure. And we have scaling as well with Syngenta, the hubs where they help them to develop, using not our money, but Syngenta's foundation's money, to develop their seed cleaning system down there. And we also have innovation platform where we link the government and the private companies, input sellers and farmers, and link them all together to achieve good extension of information. So as you can see, our farmer field schools in different villages. Before we had these big groups of people and television, showing all these technologies. But after COVID, they had to just sort of sit spaced out with masks. And then when we ask farmers, where did they get information from? And they tell us, of course, they get it from the pesticide fertilizer input sellers, mostly. So that's where they get the information from, mainly from the input sellers. That's why we are working with them. Okay, in addition, also we work with private sector, especially with seeding. We have now got 8 new seeder providers, and working with CAVAC, which is funded by DFAT, and looking at how we can organize so that they can scale out to different farms, and basically using contractors that service different farms and working with them. Okay, we're nearly finished. So we did a survey with the farmers on the benefits and also the barriers of adoption, and we asked them, what are benefits for those who adopted, and they say it's because of reduced seed rate, easy to control weeds, higher yield, whereas the farmers that didn't adopt said they didn't know much about it, which is fair enough because it's a new technology. It's too expensive because you got to hire, of course, they have to engage contractors to do it. So there are issues. And now some good news story. As well as we got lucky. We had a demonstration once with CAVAC, and Prime Minister Hun Sen saw the demonstration and was so happy with it. He donated 2,000 Eli seeders. So it's all over now to different. So we got lucky. This was like, betting the right horse, I think. Normally we don't get lucky, but this time we did. So we got lucky, and now that he's donated all these different Eli seeders. So we're nearly there. Oh, just showing. I don't know whether it works.
Quickly, Daniel.
You're nearly there? Okay, I guess. Okay, I'll skip all this. This is the mung bean journey, and also we have production guides as well, and the radio broadcasts where not that many. When we interviewed farmers randomly, only 12.5% said they listened to it, but most of those who listen, they are leading farmers. So we're quite fortunate, especially this works really well during the COVID period. So, yep, thank you very much, Kaye.
Thank you, Daniel. If we look at the question and answers, there have been some questions put up on the Q&A board. If you think
maybe I need to, I can't actually see them. I need to stop share, I think. Okay, now I can see them. If
you have a quick look at them, are there any there, like does traditional farming consider sustainable? Perhaps not that one. What are the factors to consider? Are there some supply chain issues? These are just particular questions that have been asked. Are there any there that are particularly relevant to your work in Cambodia?
I can stop answering a few of them because we've got like 5 minutes, I think. But I want to give maybe
about 4 minutes.
4 minutes left? Okay, sure. So traditional farming, does traditional farming consider as sustainable farming? How can we improve it? That's a good question. Yes, some traditional farming can be sustainable, I guess, because they are low input and probably low risk as well, but there may be issues because I suppose if you have a traditional farming system where you have only one rice crop a year, if that rice crop fails, it is really high risk because you can have hunger happening in that, that village or something. So yes and no, yes. So it can be sustainable, but I think they need to look at ways to diversify.
What about supply chain issues? Are they relevant to the work in Cambodia?
Yes, supply chains are very important. Like one of the key things that we looked at was there's input supply. Like we worked with input suppliers, and that's one of the key things. Sometimes you want to get them to use an insecticide that doesn't like really soft insecticide that doesn't kill everything, only kills the bug, but it's not available. So that's one of the key things. If it's not available, you can't actually recommend it because it's not there. And the other thing is, the other supply chain issue is the other side, the market access. That's very important because a lot of farmers just produce the product, but they don't think of how to sell it. So you need to give them market access. So that is really crucial. Without the market access, they're just price takers, and it's not good.
Okay. Is there any other ones of those questions you wanted to address?
I can do any one. Do you want to pick one so I can address it?
Well, we might leave it then, Daniel, and have you come back in at the end during our general 15 minutes of question and answers. It was a bit tough just springing them all on you at once. So thank you, Daniel. That's a really interesting presentation. We're now going to Zannie Langford's presentation, and Corey Sagita will put that up for us.
Okay, hi everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Zannie, I'm a postdoc at UQ. And if you're listening to this pre-recording, it means I didn't manage to get good enough internet connection to present live, so apologies for that. I'm currently traveling in Western Queensland. So I'm working on a project which is run through the Australia-Indonesia Centre called the Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research. And it's a really cool new approach to research for development, which brings together 11 universities from Australia and Indonesia to undertake integrated multidisciplinary research for development. And this approach is all about place-based research organised around a single topic, but bringing a whole range of skills to it. So we're looking at South Sulawesi, and in particular, the region of Maros, Baru and Pengkep. And we're looking at seaweed, which is a really significant new cash crop in Indonesia that's changing a lot of things in coastal communities. So we're 29 researchers all looking at different aspects of this. And I'm in the UQ group with Scott Waldron, and we are focusing on the seaweed value chain. So last year we did a 12-month pilot project, which ended up being a lot of desktop research because of COVID. And I'm going to talk a bit about that today. But we're also just starting up our new 18-month project, which is going to involve a lot of fieldwork, which will be done by our Indonesian partners. So that's really exciting, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. And so these are the people in our section of the research group. We're split into 4 groups, and the 8 of us are all focused on seaweed value chains. But firstly, some background on the seaweed industry and why it's such an important commodity for people interested in coastal livelihoods. So firstly, I always put this slide up because when people think of seaweed, they think of sushi. But the type of seaweed that we're interested in is not a food seaweed. Those are cold water species, which are grown almost exclusively in China, Korea, and Japan. But we're looking at commercial tropical seaweeds, which are used to produce a gel that's used in food manufacturing. So it's used in ice creams to make them taste creamier, and on meat and chicken products to make them look glossy, in cosmetics, and in a range of other things. So the product that we're interested in is that gel, which is known as Carrageenan, and it's extracted from seaweed and sold as a white powder. And so Carrageenan production in Indonesia has grown pretty much exponentially in Indonesia since the year 2000, as you can see here. Indonesia is by far the largest global producer of Carrageenan seaweeds. And so the government has prioritized the development of the industry. You can see here, the red is the current production of seaweed. And the yellow is what the government would like to see seaweed production expand to. So you can see seaweed is already mostly produced in Eastern Indonesia, around 90% in Eastern Indonesia. And there are plans to expand production 5-fold. And most of that planned expansion is in West Papua, North Maluku, and Maluku. So it's a really big business in Indonesia, and seaweed there is mostly produced by small farmers. The government says around 250,000 coastal households, and they face relatively low and fluctuating prices. They also tend to use a lot of plastic bottles in seaweed farming, as you can see here. And because seaweed farming is essentially a monocropping activity in the ocean, there are a range of environmental questions also associated with the planned expansion of the industry. So we were due to do a fair bit of fieldwork in 2020, but we couldn't, obviously. And so we were really interested in trying to understand what was going on in seaweed production during the pandemic. where some people were losing their jobs, where global trade was interrupted and travel was restricted. So we started looking at other sources of data, and we came across this company called Planet Labs, which produces satellite imagery on a really high frequency, high resolution basis. And we found that you can see seaweed farms on the imagery. And because they upload new images of the planet every few days, you can see what is happening pretty much in real time. So we started looking at this imagery really closely, and we realized it was a pretty valuable source of data because we could see changes in the seaweed industry developing. Oops. So we mapped out seaweed production along the whole mainland coastline of Phuket, and we found these really interesting seasonal patterns in seaweed production, which show a lot more variation than you can see by looking at official data. And so we saw from this that seaweed farming livelihoods are operating around a crop that's really only grown for 6 months of the year. And so here we've mapped production against rainfall for Phuket, and you can see it's really strongly affected by rainfall patterns. Because rainfall changes the salinity of the water, and the Carrageenan seaweeds grow at drastically higher speeds in water that's slightly below normal ocean salinity. So during the eastern monsoon, you get a huge flow of fresh water entering the water around Sulawesi, and seaweed cultivation expands hugely for a few months and then shrinks back down again. So that was really interesting. And then we also took this data and compared it to official estimates. And we found that the official estimates of the area under seaweed cultivation in Phuket are much, much higher than those that we generated using satellite data, about 10 times higher throughout the year. And there are a few reasons that that could be, but we've spoken to industry colleagues about that, and they tend to agree that they tend to believe that official estimates are often significantly higher than actual production rates. So there's potentially an issue in methods of data collection and sampling for the official data there. And so that would suggest that satellite imagery could be a potentially really useful governance tool for the industry. So we found then that the satellite imagery, although it was somewhat limited in the level of accuracy it has, and it works better for some sites than others, it's potentially very useful. So we started working with some colleagues here at UQ to work on developing a tool for automated processing of that imagery so that we can potentially expand the analysis across a much larger area. So this is with Swante Greenfield and Scott Chapman. And Swante has been developing a way to use the red, green, and blue bands of planet imagery to automatically detect seaweed plots. And she's been using the data set that we created by hand as a training set for doing that. And she's also started looking at using the Sentinel-2 shortwave infrared imagery to detect seaweed. And you can see that it comes up really nicely on that imagery. So we're really excited about the potential to develop this further, to get a better idea of what's going on in the industry. And we think that that could be really useful in developing policy to support smallholder seaweed farmers. And so, for example, one thing that our Phuket data showed was that during COVID-19, production of seaweed stayed much higher than usual throughout the middle of the year. So even when the seaweed stopped probably growing well, people were still producing large amounts. And so we managed to find some price data on seaweed during that time, and it looks like prices fell by on average more than a quarter in 2020. So prices were significantly lower, and yet production was significantly higher. So that indicates that there were issues for seaweed farmers during COVID-19. So we found that price data initially just to try and get an idea of price trends to match it with the satellite data. But when we looked at it closely, there were actually quite a lot of interesting things going on. And we were surprised to find that despite how important prices are to smallholders, no formal price analysis of the seaweed industry has been done. So the next thing that we did was a price analysis of the seaweed industry. So for this project, we used data collected by Jasuda, an Indonesian organization looking at seaweed industry development. And they've collected data over the last 15 years And we teamed up with researchers from that institution to analyse that data. So this part of the project is with Bodhi Giulianto, Isiadi and Ian Nish. And the statistical analysis for this was done by a colleague here at UQ, Jing Zhang. So our colleagues at Jasuda have been collecting data for about 16 years on over 20 locations in Indonesia, but we could only get a consistent data set for 13 locations, some for 5 years and some for 10 years. And so we used that data set to analyze some of the drivers of changing prices in the area. So this is the data set that we got from Jasuda. And you can see 10 years ago, sorry. 10 years ago, prices were about 10,000 rupiah a kilogram. And there have been some long-term price shifts and also a lot of short-term variation. And these are average monthly prices paid in each location. So this is even after removing minimums and maximums. And Jing did an additive decomposition of prices here and separated out the long-term trends from the seasonal variation and the random fluctuations. And so you can see here the long-term trend mapped against the actual price for the city of Chakala. And the program identified 3 structural breaks in the data, which roughly correspond to 3 key events in the industry. The first one was around 2015, where there was an economic slowdown in China, so a lot less demand for Carrageenan from China. And around the same time, Indonesia made some serious plans to ban raw seaweed exports, and prices fell pretty continuously for 2 years. And getting down towards the end of 2015, there was a lot of reporting on it as prices dropped really low. A lot of confusion about why prices were so low and people trying to stockpile seaweeds as the prices dropped below the price of production. The second break is in mid-2017, which was around the time that a new foreign investment processing facility opened in South Sulawesi by the Chinese company BLG, which is the world's largest Carrageenan manufacturer. And there was a sharp rise in prices around that time. And lastly, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to reduced exports to China, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But so this is the general long-term trend. And if you remove that from the data, you can see the intra-year variation, which is here. So you would expect to see seasonal changes in prices, maybe lower in the middle of the season where there's a lot of production and higher outside of it. So the interesting thing about this is that all of the 13 cities show the same seasonal pattern, even though they're spread across a very wide area and have very different seasonal growth patterns. Because the seaweed is so heavily affected by ocean conditions and particularly salinity levels and water flow rates, you get really different seasonalities in locations which could just be just a few kilometres apart. So what you can see from this is the intra-year price change varies with the national general trend in seasonality, which is that production is better in most places in the middle of the year, rather than with the local trend, which makes sense because that local change would not be enough to change supply for a region more generally. But it is interesting because it means that if farmers can predict changing prices and whether prices are likely to go up or down, they can plan their sales and harvests of the seaweed more effectively. And so after we took out the long-term and seasonal price shifts, what you have left is unexplained. And you can see that we had here a lot of unexplained random noise, higher than the seasonal variation. And that could be a range of different things, but one thing that it's probably linked to is the quality of the dried seaweed, particularly the presence of contaminants like sand and salt and of different moisture contents. So these numbers are from Ian Nish, who says that export quality seaweed is about 29% weed solids, 35% moisture, and the remaining sand and salt. Whereas good local quality is about 37% moisture, and poor local quality can be up to 47% moisture. So if you look at the differences here, a poor quality dried seaweed with a lot of moisture in it can have up to 18% less actual seaweed than an export quality seaweed. So you're effectively buying less seaweed for the same price. But that's that's very difficult to assess at the farm gate because, as you can see in this picture, the seaweed is sold in these big bags by the hundreds of kilograms. So we ran a regression on the data to see if we could determine the statistical effect of moisture and sand and salt content on seaweed prices. And we found that there was no statistically significant effect, which is quite striking because it means that these really important factors are not being captured in the price of seaweed. And that confirms something which we already know, which is that farmers are not typically being rewarded for improving their seaweed preparation practices. And that's bad for farmers who want to produce a better quality product because there's no incentive. And you can see here an example of a farmer expressing concern about that. And so other things that go into this random category are things like natural disasters or disease wiping out large areas or changes in rainfall, which you can see from these pictures of seaweed being dried can make it almost impossible to dry the crop. So farmers could lose their crop to mold if there's prolonged rainfall. And the last thing we did is a spatial price integration analysis. So we looked at prices across the country and we found that Takala is the price leader and that prices are spatially integrated. So a change in price in Takala drives price changes throughout other seaweed producing regions. So that generally suggests a functioning market. However, if we just look visually at this graph, we can see that there are periods of more or less price integration. And in particular, the prices became less integrated after the 2017 price increase. And we suppose that that might be a result of the opening of the new factory in South Sulawesi, which would make sense if you think about it, because it would increase prices differentially around the country, with areas closer to the factory seeing a bigger increase in prices. So we suspect that's what is going on, but we need to get to our field work to explore that further. And the other thing that you can see from the price integration analysis is the differing effect of COVID-19 on different cities. So here are 3 locations in Indonesia: Tual in Maluku, Kupang in NTT, and Makassar in Sulsel. And you can see firstly a really big difference in farm gate prices, but also that Maluku had a much more severe drop in prices at the start of the pandemic. And you can see the same thing within South Sulawesi. So here are 3 locations in Sulsel, Palopo being the most remote. And you can see that Palopo experienced an immediate and drastic 40% price drop in the first month of the pandemic there. And so here I've graphed the cumulative price changes for each city over the course of the year last year. And you can see that these remote areas experienced sudden and severe price drops here within a month or 2. Whereas in other areas, like Bali here, you can see that there was a less severe and more gradual drop in prices. And so it seems likely that with travel restrictions and reduced demand from China, more remote regions were hit harder, as exporters and processors could probably meet their needs more easily by sourcing from nearby regions. And so here I've mapped these out across the country. This is the price drop from January to March 2020 in different areas. So really high price drops in some locations and not so bad in others. So in conclusion, we can see that prices are integrated across the country, that national rather than local seasonality drives prices, and that there's a lot of random variation which is not linked to quality. And as a result of that, you have poor transmission of price incentives and a need for improved governance of the industry. And so from here, we've teamed up with Jasuda to help us manage the fieldwork component of our next project. And for that, we've designed a really cool project, which is going to follow the seaweed value chain from the ocean through households and communities, up through the domestic marketing system, through processing, and to the global Carrageenan market. So we have some really cool stuff coming up. We have the first section is on sustainable farming. So in that area, we're going to keep working on automatic mapping of satellite imagery. We're also going to be doing some field trials on growth rates, Carrageenan yields and biodiversity, and also doing a really cool little study with some colleagues in chemical engineering with Brom and Laycock. And so we're going to test how much plastic seaweed farming is releasing into the ocean, which will be really interesting. And then in our livelihoods work package, we're going to do a lot of cool work with households. So firstly, a 200 household quantitative survey to try and get an understanding of seaweed farming livelihoods. We also have a 12-month qualitative data collection period where we're going to have 4 staff based in the villages full-time collecting qualitative information. In our domestic marketing section, we're going to be doing a lot of qualitative interviews with traders in the industry, and also working with some colleagues at Monash to do some logistics modelling of seaweed trade around the province. In our processing section, we have some people in our research group from IPB and UNHAS who are biologists and in product development. So they're going to be developing their research on developing different products from seaweed, including bioethanol. In the global value chains group, we'll be working with IPB colleagues to analyse global trade flows, which is quite interesting. And we'll also be looking to make policy recommendations from the research that arises from all of these 5 projects. So we think this is a really cool and interesting new approach to research for development. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please get in touch. Thanks.
That was an excellent presentation. Unfortunately, we won't be able to ask questions. Some of those graphs just show such incredible variability. Really quite amazing. I'd now like to move on to our next speaker, Imon Jaw, who's also an Australian Awards student, and she's going to talk about migration in Myanmar, challenges and implications for agricultural development. Can't hear you, Imon. You're mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Kaye. Good afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, Imon. Could you press from beginning, like the left side? Yes. Yeah, looks great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your giving me a chance as a speaker for such a great conference. So my name is Imon. I'm a PhD student at the University of New England, and my background is the agriculture economics and focusing on the sustainable agriculture. So I'm also a teacher and lecturer at the Yizin Agriculture University from my back home country, Myanmar. And I have worked as a teacher and researcher for 14 years in Myanmar. So I conduct a lot of farmer survey, and also the research projects in many places of Myanmar. So when I conducting the farmer survey, I always ask the farmer, what are their major challenges facing for sustainable agriculture production? Most of the farmers answer that climate change impact, and also nowadays the answer that labor scarcity, labor reducing in the agriculture's production became a major problem. So why labor scarcity is happening in the agriculture's productions of Myanmar? So the answer is that most of the young farmers and young farm laborers move to the other place and to get there and to look at job opportunity. As you know, agriculture is the seasonal employees, not permanent employment, and so they have to look at the other jobs to get their livelihood security. So I got the research question. The reductions of the labor supply in the agriculture's labor market can affect the crop productivity or agriculture's productivity or not. So I choose these topics. For my PhD research. So I got the scholarships from the I am a scholarship holder of Johor Rai Fellowships under the Australian Awards category. So I can do this this research by supporting of the Australian government. So yeah. I will going to present the following outlines. So firstly, why the migration is so important for Myanmar. Yes, not only the Myanmar, but also the many countries of the countries around the world. Migration has become popular. As you know, the current global migrant population is around 272 million. In 2019, this amount is equal to 3.5% of world population. And in Myanmar, based on 2040 census data, 11 million of people. This amount is nearly equal to 20% of total population. Participate in the Myanmar migration process. So among that, 9.4 million for domestic migrants and 2.2 million for Indonesian migrants. Based on the, however, the ministries of labor, immigrations and populations estimate that the actual numbers of Indonesian migrants is greater than the official numbers. They estimate that there was 4.25 million of Indonesian migrants in 2014 because of the illegal and undocumented movement of migration was happening between the neighbor countries and Myanmar, like Thailand and China. So in 2019, 10% of the national labor force are Indonesian migrants. And this, moreover, more than 2 million of people are working in the Thailand and Malaysia. This amount is only for Thailand and Malaysia, not including the other countries. So this is the huge amounts of Indonesian migrants. And also when I looking at the remittance flows of Myanmar, in 2019, Myanmar's economies got that 2.8 US billions of remittance. This amount is equal to 4% of the total GDP. That's why we cannot argue that migration has become a play important role in Myanmar's economic development. So let's look at the roles of migrations in developments, especially in rural area. Because I did this research and focus on the rural farmers. And in this research, I use both primary and secondary data. And for primary data, in 2019, I conduct fan survey. Fan surveys in 2 regions of Myanmar, Mandalay and Sakai region. So, and you can see that when looking at the income, differences in income status, household income status between the migrants and non-migrants household. Migrants household gets more income than non-migrants household. So you can see that, and you can see this is the fan income. There is a little differences between the fan income between migrants and non-migrant household, but there is a huge differences between big amounts of differences between the non-fan income. So this point out that remittance plays an important role for rural economic condition. So the other thing is that you can see these two areas, Tipayans and Metila. These areas are located in the highest migrants populated area. So the differences between the migrants and non-migrants household percentage, income percentage is really greater than the other 2 areas. So, and from the other qualitative perspectives. Because in this research, I use the two kinds of analysis, qualitative analysis and also the quantitative analysis. From the qualitative analysis, most of the farmers recognize that better economic conditions of migrants household farmers. And also the village heads and also the head officer levels accept that the remittance monies come from the migrants contributes in the community development, such as the economics, education, and also infrastructure development. So, for example, some of the village can build school and can connect the electricity and, can connect the electricity and also can renovate the village road through the fundraising of the migrants villagers. This is because the migrants villagers support them, the fundraisings, and the village can develop by using this fund. So it is really important for the rural development. So, but we should look at the other side. This is the challenges for the sustainable agriculture development. Yes, because Myanmar is the agro-based country, agriculture plays an important role for Myanmar economies. So reductions of the farm labors from the agricultures can reduce the agriculture's productivity and also the crop quality, and also the can reduce the agriculture zone areas, because mostly the labor scarcity is happen at the during the peak season. So the farmer have to offer more money to hire the labor. So the farmer are facing the high production costs, and some of the farmer cannot afford to pay high costs, so they reduce the zone area. And but during the peak season, they cannot find the higher labor, so there is the delay in the harvesting, so they are facing the post-harvest loss. Moreover, more active and young men are participating in migration process. So that's why the left behind women and also the women laborers are more participating in the rural labor markets and agriculture. So this scenario called the feminizations of agriculture. So it can affect the crop productivity, because most of the women who are not familiar in agriculture in the previous, so they have lack skill and lack of the farm management skill. This may cause the drop of the crop productivity and also the delaying of the crop production. That's why this impact can lead to the food insecurities of our country. So this is the main challenges, and its main challenges for the sustainable agriculture development. Yeah. So I would like to clarify the impacts of the migrations and industry area, and through the strengths and weakness and opportunities and threats. Is this the SWOT analysis? So when I'm looking at the strengths, economics, infrastructures, educationers, and human capacity developments can gain from the migrations for the individuals and community level. So because people can get through the remittance money, people can get the economic developments, and also they can use the remittance for the education and for the other infrastructure development. However, in weaknesses, reductions of the labor force can cause the unsustainability of the agriculture's development. And people can get the opportunity, For example, job opportunity from the migration, and also the economic opportunity from the remittance. This is their opportunity, but we should concern the threat. Threats like agriculture and the development because of the labor scarcities and because of the reductions of the zone area. And other side is the human capacity losses. And also the other social problem is the retention, health and social problem. For example, some of the returnees can they got the draft problems and also the other things. And because in Myanmar, the undocumented migration is popular. So that's why, that's why human trafficking problem is the serious. So this is the other threatening for rural developments. So that's why I would like to conclude the following issue. So in the real labor markets, they have an experience of the labor scarcity during the peak season, and which could jeopardize Myanmar food security. And on the other perspectives, migration has a negative effect on the development of agriculture, and also the losing of the human capacity is for the remaining in standing community. This is the this issue we can call the alarmistic issue. This is the negative impact. And also, but on the other side, we have the development perspectives, because migration is the way and means to mitigate the household economic risk of the farmer. And we can conclude that I can conclude that migration has both impact, positive and negative impact. So I would like to express that to mitigate the negative impact, because the negative impact, if we can reduce the negative impacts and promote the positive impact, we can gain the win-win situation from the migration. So we should follow emphasize the sustainable agriculture development program, such as through the strategy, good strategy, rules and principles. For example, we can substitute the farm mechanization instead of the using of the farm labor. But on the other side, we should concern about the sustainable, because when we using a lot of the machine in the farm, and we can fix the land declarations or something like that. So that is the other point. And so the other thing is that on the other side is the for migrants. Migrants has a lot of they have a lot of challenges and they have a lot of problems, because in my country and illegal migration is is very popular and very populated. So that's why designing the comprehensive and cooperative laws and migration laws and principles are really needed to reduce the risk of migrants. This is that. And also, as you know, last year, because of the COVID pandemic situation, many of the migrants are returned to their origin because in their destination areas all are lockdowns and the economies are shut down, so they have no job opportunities and they came back to my country. So last year, based on the ILO papers data, and in Myanmar, the remittance flows is dropped significantly. So that is the negative impact. And also, as you know, in Myanmar nowadays, after February, and we are facing the military coup. And the people are fighting for democracy, and the younger people, more than 800 people are dying by the military because of the military coups. So it is a really big challenges for us to sustainable our agriculture's developments. So we should find out the way. we should find out the way to scope these challenges from the variable perspectives view, and also using the goal strategy, and also by collaborating the other international institutions, and to get our goals, the sustainable agriculture development. So we have to do a lot of things. But for me, I think so. We have a lot of challenge, and challenge is on the other side is the opportunity for us. So we should find our opportunity by facing the challenges. So thank you. That's all my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Imon. We've got time for a few questions to you. And I noticed in the question and answer board, there were a question by Colin Scott. What sort of initiatives might help small-scale farmers operating at subsistence level, and in particular to Myanmar in, I think it's agriculture, what does sustainable farming mean to farmers? I think they were particularly interested in it. If you have a look at the question and answer,
yeah.
Unless I think the word is agriculture, but it says porkiculture.
I think it's the agriculture maybe.
Agriculture?
No. Yeah.
So there was a particular question then, and there was another question about migration.
Yeah.
Which sector is facing the greatest problem from migration?
Yeah.
So perhaps you might just have a look at those questions, please, Imon.
Yes. Yes. The first question is, the initiatives for most small-scale farmers operation as the sustainable levels. This is the interesting question. Thank you. So yes, in Myanmar, most of the farmers are, small-scale farmer rather than the big, large-scale farmer. So for them, because they are the main challenges is the highest production cost. We cannot compare, we cannot compete it. This farmer cannot compete it with other big scale farmers. So to get the sustainable level for these farmers, and we need to reduce the crop production cost. Cost production cost is really important for the small scale farmer. So we should to get the sustainable development, because most of the farmer who own the small amounts of the land, they don't want to do the agriculture, and they move to the other place and they give up the agriculture setup. So this is not good for the sustainable agriculture. So that's why we should support that to improve and to sustain their farming system. We should provide them by the technologies, and also we should support to reduce their crop production costs to competitors and other people. Yeah. Now the next question is, in Myanmar agriculture, what is the sustainable farming means to farmer? This is a really tough question. Yeah. For me, for my experience, in my master degrees, I did the environmental awareness of the farmers. The research is environmental awareness, and also the sustainable awareness of the farmers. The farmers, most of the farmers, they think that they use the traditional way, and they think they are doing the sustainable agriculture. But some of the traditional way are not sustainable for all. This is not sustainable way. But so, for example, when I survey some of the farmers, and for example, they use a lot of the nowadays the farmer use the chemical, but in previous the traditional way they didn't use the chemical. Now the farmer transfer to the chemical uses, but they are not safe chemical using. So the people are give the educate the farmers how to use the chemicals or something like that. But some people said they don't accept that. Some farmers they don't accept that. So that is really hard. So I think that to get the sustainable meanings of for farmer is not to sustainable means that production is continuously is not sustainable. Sustainable is the people of the farmer should produce the cross continuously and also the safely to the environment, and also that I think that this is the meanings of the sustainables and the farmers, but some of the farmers not understanding this meaning. Yeah.
About the last question about migration.
Yes, migration is has some benefits. If migration is also challenging, which sector is facing greater problems for the migrations in Myanmar? Yes, I already talked about that. Migration is the good for farmers and also they have a challenge. Which sector? The sectors for me is in production sector. Production sector is in Myanmar, most of the farmers are still following the traditional farming system. So they use the peppers and also the livestock and also the draft animal. So in production sector, they are facing the major challenge of the migration. Because of the reducing of the labors and they cannot plant right time on time, they cannot harvest on time. This is the big challenges. This sector is big challenges for the migration. I think so. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think you've answered those questions really well, Imon.
Yeah.
I'd like to now go back to Daniel because I cut Daniel off when he was starting to answer quite a lot of questions. So I'm going to give him the opportunity to look at some of those questions, those early questions on the question and answer board. And perhaps you'd like to have a look at those, please. Thanks, Daniel.
Yes, I have. I have quickly answered them online already, so that in case we didn't get time. One of the questions I think is how often is mechanized drum seeder adopted at the farmers level in Cambodia? That's a good question. I don't think it's very popular because I think the mechanized drum seeder is from Vietnam and they have to import it in, and it is only used for wet seeding, which means it's only used in the main wet season and not the early wet season. So you need to have water to be able to do wet seeding, and not everybody has water. And mainly it is used for, I think some seed producers would use it. So they will use that for seed production. So that's one question. I don't know whether we have time for the others, but let's see what's the other interesting ones. What is the impact?
We have got a bit of time, Daniel, so
yeah,
please.
we have. Okay. What is the impact of digital technology on sustainable farming in Southeast Asia? That's a good question. One of my former students, Sam, his name, but anyway, Sam, he did a survey for Bill and Melinda Bates Foundation, and they did a sort of a survey on people using technologies. And that's why we have also used, because we noticed that a lot of farmers, even though they're quite poor, the smallholders, they have smartphones, even the cheap ones, and they have access to smartphones and Facebook. So that's why we are sort of using this sort of methods like apps and, Facebook messages, Telegram is quite popular as well. We're using this in our extension services now, like that we're providing to farmers. The reason is because with COVID, we can't go out in the fields so much anymore. So we actually get their phone numbers and send things out through their through the Facebook, so that or Telegram, so that they can access this information. Okay, and can education at primary level promote sustainable farming? Another good question. In our previous project, we actually worked with primary schools in their life sciences section, where we would have, like practicals to help them identify which is a good insect and which is a bad insect, so that the primary school kids will go back and tell their parents and also educate their parents. So I think that's a useful, good question. And I put in the link to that, the video on the primary school engagement that we have been doing. Okay.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yes.
I would
Thanks,
perhaps
Kate.
just like to comment on the question about the satellite imagery, and could it be utilised to track and document changes on small farmers from big infrastructure development? And I think that's definitely right. I think there's a real place for that satellite imagery, and I think it could contribute on a much broader picture. I was really interested in how it could contribute from the Seaweed project. If we just go down to the bottom, Imon, you had a question about how women think about better ways of dealing with migration, and just wondered if that had been discussed at some stage.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Because my topics of my PhD topics is that just not only the migration, but also I emphasize the gender role. So yes, women announced after the migration process, most of the women are participating in the agricultural productions, and especially their power, their authorities are increasing than more increased than the previous. For example, they are participating in the selections of the varieties or something like that, a lot of things. So that's why I think to scope the for example, feminizations of agriculture, the problems caused by the feminizations of agriculture. So to cope this problem, we should educate, and we should promote the women roles in agriculture. And so, for example, we should give the trainings, and we should promote the advanced technologies, and we should emphasize the women participation in the agriculture. So this is I think this is one of the way to answer to solve this problem. And women participating, women empowerment should improve after the migration process. And the other question is one of the question is the transformations of the mechanization. So yes, now most of the people are solving the labor scarcity by transforming the usage of mechanizations in many places of the Myanmar. But in Myanmar, most of the areas are small scale land, so the farm mechanization can do in this small area. So most of the farm mechanization is we need a big land areas, for example, a lot of herda. So, but in Myanmar, in plantation states, we use the treader, and also the harvesting state we use the combined harvester. Now, most of the farmers use, but but the major problem for the farmer is the farmer cannot access the farm mechanization easily. So they have to rent, they have to find out the machines, and some of the places they cannot use the farm mechanization. This is the major challenge. And so I and service a lot of the township officers and also the head level officers, and they have a plan to promote the farm mechanization by collaborating with the private and public sector. So this is the next question is, how can sustainable farming in Myanmar cope with climate change impacts? So it is really interesting because my previous research is the environmental awareness index, and also, so I think to sustain the families in Myanmar, the awareness of the farmer is really important. So because the farmers don't know about the climate change, and they don't know, they did not recognize the climate change, they can get not awareness how to prevent, how to solve this problem. So awareness of the farmer is really important. So I think so we should promote and we should provide the farmers to get more awareness concerning with the climate change and how they scope this climate change impacts, and so, and also including nowadays the the woman farmer role is a more and more important in the agriculture. So that's why, and also not only the farmer but also the women who are involving in the agriculture should have the awareness how to scope the problems of the climate change to get the sustainable farming. I think so.
Thank you. Thank you, Imon. I wonder, Daniel, whether you'd like to make some final comments on climate change impact and how you think that's going to be addressed in basically in the Southeast Asian region.
That's a good question. Climate change is happening, I think, quite profoundly in a lot of Mekong countries. I think sometimes the monsoon comes in late, or and doesn't get sustained, and that's an issue because you have a rainy season and it stops halfway, and then So I think that's one of the key things. I mean, that's why we are working with like mechanization to try to drill seed so that we have more secure type systems where plants will not just be on the seeds will not just be on the surface. They will be drill seeded and they can survive a short drought. So we need to look at resilient systems in the long term, not just just looking at this season, but how do we make sure that when we are working with farmers, we're helping them to develop farming systems that are resilient, that have also got diversity, not just growing just rice only, but have a range of different crops, so that if one crop fails, you have another crop that will give you some cash flow. So that's my take on this.
Very good point. I think that's probably ample for this session. I'd like to thank Daniel, Zannie, Imon as being excellent speakers this afternoon. I'm sorry that Zannie wasn't able to answer questions to her, but perhaps she will be able to answer those directly if she's given a copy of the questions that were asked to her. I'd also like to thank Corey Syngenta and Dion Lee from the Global Engagement and Entrepreneurship section, because they certainly have helped greatly in putting this session together. So I'm going to clap. So thank you very much to the people who've presented. It's been a great session. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kaye.
Thank you. Hey. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.